So just a quick spoiler alert before we actually dive into this episode for the review. Okay, so there were a lot of really interesting stuff here going on in this second episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I definitely think that the first thing we want to jump into is our running theme for this companion, which is exorcising the ghost of Steve Rogers. We'll also talk about John Walker a bit, and of course the powerful scene with Isaiah as well. And I'll give a little bit of thoughts on the Flag Smasher group and whatnot. Now, first things first, let's dive into our main running theme for this companion series. You'll recall that in the first episode of our review companion, we talked about how important it was going to be for both Sam and Bucky to come to some sort of peace with how Steve saw each of them. For Sam, there's definitely still this element of disbelief in himself, and even probably a sense of letting Steve down in giving away the shield. Now, in the therapy session scene in this episode, we start to see just how much Steve is haunting these two men, and it's really interesting how the language is used to bear this out. Now, when Bucky asks Sam why he gave away the shield, Sam's answer parallels a question that I had for all of you at the end of the last episode. My question had to do with, do you think that Sam did the right thing, but it went wrong? Or did Sam just outright do the wrong thing in giving away the shield? His answer to Bucky's question is really interesting. He says, "Can you," meaning Bucky and Steve, ever consider the fact that maybe I just did what I thought was right in that moment? Now, we need to tease out the language here a little bit and play a little linguistical gymnastics, but what I love about this answer is he's not saying that what he did was wrong, but the defensiveness in him and in that answer, you can feel like he knows that it went wrong. So in a sense, Sam answers my question right here in the episode, and it was really interesting to watch. But of course, we do need to ask an important question here. Was he really wrong? And if so, based on whose logic? Well, I think Sam would say based on Steve's logic. And of course, that's a real problem. Bucky comes right out in this therapy session and essentially just bleeds all over the place, his problems with what's going on. His answer to his own question about why Sam gave away the shield is based on the fact that Sam's decision to give it away is an indication that Sam believes that Steve was wrong about him. And if Steve could be wrong about Sam's character, then Captain America could have also been wrong about Bucky's character. Now, I have to admit, that's some great writing, and it definitely draws you into the Bucky storyline. Again, it's not exactly something we didn't see coming, but it was still a good thing to actually witness and to see Stan pull that off in a meaningful way. He did a really nice job in this scene. So what does all of this mean? So much of what both Sam and Bucky see in the world around them right now is still through the lens of Steve Rogers. And I think both Sam and Bucky are still misreading Steve's actual point. Steve didn't think that Bucky was perfect or that Sam was perfect, and he certainly wouldn't have said that he were a perfect human being. In fact, he makes that very clear in the Civil War movie when he talks to Wanda about the whole Sokovia incident and how all you can essentially do is make the decision that you think is right to head toward the greater good in the moment. And because of that, you're going to have ramifications that are really quite bad that can happen. Therefore, although I think it's likely that Steve would have pushed back against Sam's decision to give up the shield, I still believe he would have accepted it because Sam was trying to go toward the greatest good that he could see in front of him. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments below if you think that I'm right about that. Would Steve Rogers have ultimately agreed with Sam's decision or not? Would he have just outright said, "Nope, you're wrong. I gave it to you and that's it"? Now that brings us to our new Captain America, John Walker. The episode sets him up to be a fairly decent guy overall, and, that's actually pretty interesting in of itself. I think it makes it more complex for us than it could have been. If you had made him into a jerk, it would have been easy to hate him and love Bucky and Sam. But because they make him into this pretty normal, pretty overall good intended person, it makes us have to, it creates more tension in the scenes between John Walker and Sam and Bucky. There are, of course, two major problems with John Walker. The first one being he's not a super soldier. He even admits this himself in the interview that takes place in his old high school. Secondly, though, there is a bit of a dark side to him. You'll recall toward the end of the episode when he tells both Bucky and Sam to stay out of their way. There is an element there of a threat, which makes you kind of look at him just a bit askance. What does that mean? That's not very Steve Rogers-esque there, Captain America. My concern with Walker's approach is that he believes more in the shield and in the suit than he does himself. In a sense, it's actually Sam's words from episode 1 come to life. Sam wanted people to realize that it was the man behind the shield and suit, Steve Rogers, not necessarily the suit itself, that was symbolic of good. Walker, however, seems to be relying heavily on the symbols themselves to do the work. And that's likely going to come back to bite him in the butt in the end. Now, when Bucky and Sam meet Isaiah in Baltimore, it's an incredibly powerful scene. Of course, the episode is using its fictional storyline to actually highlight a pretty dark moment in the past of the United States. Now, in America, when we hear the word Tuskegee, two historical events tend to come to mind. The first one being the Tuskegee Airmen, which were a group of African-American men who flew and fought bravely in World War II, even amidst pretty drastic segregating conditions in the military. Secondly, it brings to mind a terrible, unjust experiment that was conducted on African-American males between 1932 and 1972. Today, we have review boards and laws that govern how scientific studies are conducted. However, the unsuspecting individuals who enlisted for the Tuskegee experiment study thought they were receiving medical care and/or actual treatment for their ailments. Instead, they were given placebos and were really only there to study or to monitor what happens to the human being when syphilis goes untreated. Now, given this historical context, Isaiah's anger and mistrust is completely warranted and understandable. Now, I encourage anyone who's unfamiliar with both Tuskegee stories, the Airmen and the experiment, to take a moment and do some research on your own, because the more we share and understand history, the stronger we become as a people and the more unified as well. Now, finally, I'm not really sure how I feel about the Flag Smasher group, to be honest with you. I think the series has to be careful about introducing too much complexity into the villains, because it can take a little bit of the charm away from the old-fashioned good versus evil storyline. When you introduce too much complexity, sometimes you can, again, overprocess plot and make it almost too much of a chore to even watch. Overall, I loved it. I thought it was a great episode, and I'm certainly looking forward to episode 3 as well. The chemistry between Stan and Mackie is spot on. They feed into each other perfectly. So, until next time, have a great rest of your day.